William Jennings Bryan was right about a lot of things. But there was one personal suspicion that he had which he desperately wished to be true. One fact about the material universe he would have given anything to prove, even his sanity and his health. The man newspapers called the great debater, the boy orator, and the great commoner needed to believe that God had created the world in 6 days. And he needed everyone in America to understand that science was just a bunch of smart people with microscopes making up theories, whereas the Bible was the capital T truth of the universe. This was a topic William wanted to end his life arguing, the hill he had chosen to die on. His health was declining. His age was catching up with him. He wanted to go out a champion of God. And so he chose the tiny town of Dayton, Tennessee, where a young high school teacher had dared to break the law by teaching evolution in one of God's own high schools. As we talked about in our last episode, William Jennings Bryan had a superpower. He was the world's best public speaker, which he proved by racking up the most popular votes a presidential candidate has ever received throughout their lifetime. When William Jennings Bryan got behind the lectern, it was biblical. He knew what to say and how to say it, and he spoke with a love for the common man and a sense of moral authority that has never been matched.
The individual is but an atom. He is born, he acts, he dies. But principles are eternal.
This was the man who was chosen to be the prosecutor in a trial that would determine if evolution could be taught in schools side by side with the word of the Almighty. What William didn't expect was that he'd be made to look foolish by a defense attorney who asked Bryan to take the stand and answer a pretty straightforward question about the Bible.
Because the Lord didn't make the sun until the 4th day.
That is correct.
That first day, well, what do you think it was, 24 hours long?
The Bible says it was a day.
Well, there was no sun. How do you know how long it was?
The Bible says it was a day.
If there was no sunlight before the earth was created, then how could God make the earth in 6 days, if there's no such thing as days yet?
Then you interpret that the first day is recorded in the book of Genesis could have been a day of indeterminate length. It could have been 30 hours. Could have been a week, could have been a month, could have been a year, could have been 100 years, or it could have been 10 million years.
For one thing, it was bizarre in the extreme for a defense to call on Bryan, the prosecuting attorney, to take the stand. It was a dramatic court maneuver that only happens in movies. Secondly, Bryan was indeed an expert on the Bible, which should have meant that questioning him was courtroom suicide for the defense attorney. Except, the defense attorney was none other than Clarence Darrow. For context, Clarence was an Illinois attorney who liked to defend the downtrodden. In 1894, he went to bat for a union leader being targeted by greedy railroad companies. That same year, he defended a mentally ill drifter who was accused of murder and ultimately executed over a confession he was compelled to sign. Darrow took that loss harshly and went on to defend laborers in over 100 execution cases, which he felt was morally reprehensible punishment in a civilized society. Clarence Darrow was still fighting for the less fortunate when, in July 1925, he caught wind of a high-profile case. A case about a high school teacher discussing evolution in his classroom, despite state laws against it. So Darrow rushed to Dayton, Tennessee, to defend John Thomas Scopes. If God's best public speaker, William Jennings Bryan, was about to defend the Bible, then God's champion of the poor and underrepresented, Clarence Darrow, would be called upon to expose its weaknesses. So back to the famous question that Darrow posed to Bryan on the stand. If William Jennings Bryan is an expert on the Bible, and if the concept of days didn't exist before God could create sunlight, then how do we know he made the world in 6 days? This is the question that finally broke the confidence of William Jennings Bryan.
He wants to destroy everybody's belief in the Bible and in God.
That's not true, and you know it.
We'll get to Bryan's answer in a moment. But first, we have some groundwork to cover about debate, argument, and why an entire education system would even be allowed to rest on a single moral question. You're listening to The Reengineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-duh on the internet.
Winning an argument feels good, doesn't it? It makes you look smart, authoritative, and powerful. But what about in the long term? If you could win every argument, would it make you more popular in life? More loved? Would you be wealthier if you were always right? Is that something we should even desire? Or was Ben Franklin right when he said, "It's better to be loved than to be right"? This is part 3 in our series about the power of persuasion. Part 1 and 2 were all about the role debaters play on the internet and how debate culture and political polarization have made some persuaders exceptionally wealthy. It's also led to the decline in American trust in mainstream media, the rise of outrage clickbait. But today, we'll look at the working mechanics of argument instead. If we want to win, how do we do it? How do we dunk on people and make them cry salty tears? Versus, how do we prove them wrong in a way that changes their opinion? We'll start with a few myths. Myths that terrible debaters like to tell themselves. Myth 1. If I'm an awesome critical thinker, then shouldn't I be amazing at debate too? So why do all my arguments fall flat? Myth 2. Why does it seem like stupid leaders have so many followers, whereas smart leaders get ignored? Myth 3. Is it even possible to convince anyone of anything anymore? How do I pierce the bulletproof armor of someone's entrenched beliefs? We're going to get to our myths, but first I want to ask Joe about logical fallacies, why they are so important, and why they get ignored in modern politics.
This deals with a courtroom trial about religion versus state versus the ability to teach science.
But even though this is 100 years ago, it is extremely relevant today.
Yes, thank you. That is the point I'm weekly trying to make. Is we are having that argument right now in the Texas court. In fact, it's gone up to the state level on whether or not they will be teaching the Bible in school, and it looks like it's going to swing toward we're going to be teaching the Bible in schools. And record numbers of Texans are now going to be homeschooling because of that. So it is, and they're also arguing and fighting over the voucher system, which is like, do we want to allow people like a certain amount of tax money to take their kids to private schools if they want to, or to, so it's getting really,
So it's getting economic too, right? I mean,
oh yeah, that's one of the main arguments is like, already older people don't want to pay for people's kids. That's why having a kid is so expensive, like prohibitively. It's almost like rappers used to wear gold chains to like show off how much money they have. My generation's version of that is having a kid. If you go to a party with a baby on your hip, it's like, holy shit, that guy's got money. So yeah, it's getting political, it's getting economic, it's getting into like children, and it's getting into like what we teach and how we do it.
This is what's a funny, it's interesting thing, because kids weren't learning about God in school. People were taking their kids out and teaching them just about the Bible and not enough about school. And now it's flipping. If God goes back, and then the other kinds of people will say, no, I don't want my kid to go to church. I want my kid to go to school.
Right. But we're not the only state doing that. Multiple states are now having this argument. And this is an old argument. That's our point here. And the disconnect we're having right now in this country, just on every level, is we have either forgotten or neglected to learn the lesson about how to convince people and how to win arguments. In our past 2 episodes, we have talked about the value of connecting with people, and that you cannot convince anyone of anything unless you speak to them in person. We covered some pretty good studies about, how much people get swayed when they're seeing text online. and that this massive, Reddit study proved that you basically cannot convince somebody against their own belief if it's in text. You do have to go up and shake somebody's hand. You do have to talk to them in real life. So the internet will not correct anyone's belief. It just won't.
So the video, so me making a video arguing with you will never change.
No.
You'll just make you more whatever you are.
It makes us very happy to pick sides. Like we very much enjoy watching argument online. And that's in our past episode, our first part of this, we talked about how lucrative that is, how insane amounts of money, like these debaters make by like going onto YouTube and arguing with each other like assholes. But that doesn't sway anybody, and pretending it does is foolish. But today we want to learn how to dunk on people. We want to actually answer the question, how do you win an argument? Like we know how now to convince somebody. We've figured out that we have to be,
it's more fun to be right then, right?
Yeah.
It's a sign of superiority. It's a sign of intelligence.
Right. If our first couple episodes were about being Benjamin Franklin and wanting to be loved rather than being right, this is the reverse. We're going to do our episode now about how do you be right? Like how do you win an argument at all costs, and how do you burn those bridges? Like how do you burn those bridges in flashy style? How do you make that great debater money? Did you have to learn logical fallacies at any point?
I don't think so.
Okay. I asked that because you mentioned that you had been in a debate class in high school, and they usually cover them, but they sometimes don't like teach you how to use them. And also we don't use them very much anymore either. Like we seem perfectly happy slinging around ad hominems or straw man arguments or moral equivalence.
What are logical fallacies then? So
logical fallacies are I'm trying to think of a way to put it. Errors in argument, I think, is the best way to put it.
Okay.
A logical fallacy is if you're losing an argument, instead of losing that argument, you attack the credibility of the person arguing.
Okay.
Or instead of losing an argument on fact and on your statements and you're losing your argument on how much you know, you do a false equivalency. I think, to put it into modern terms, both MSNBC and Fox News do whataboutisms. I want that to be added to the actual historical logic fallacies, by the way. The phrase that, you're losing and somebody is, roasting you about like your shitty politics, and you say, well, what about the awful thing the other side did? And it totally takes the heat off of you.
Misdirection, right?
Yeah. But we're going to go through them. It's boring. You probably learned them in high school. It's something where people have stopped calling each other out on it. Like if you watch the news, sometimes a news commentator will be like, "You're making a straw man argument." That's the one I hear quite often. But like a lot of the other ones, nobody cares anymore. Like it doesn't seem to be, it doesn't seem to be worth mentioning. Even though it does show a flaw in your argument, like not just a flaw, it shows a weak leg on the stool, and we shouldn't accept it.
I found a good example of one. My father smoked 4 packs a day of cigarettes from the age of 14, and he lived to 95. So smoking can't be that bad for you.
Right.
Right. And
yeah.
And you hear those things.
This is not an episode about logical fallacies, because we actually have better ways to debunk people's arguments now. We're only mentioning logical fallacies in that they exist. It's a good way to learn how to argue better, and it's the foundation of argument. Basically, it's the foundation of flaws and how to win an argument. However, because in current political times, people don't catch each other on these as often, and they don't seem to care to catch them on these, we're only going to basically give them lip service and then move on to the things that actually work to win an argument at this moment. Hasty generalizations, which would be something like, I've met a few people like this and they're all the same. Like they do this thing. Insert any Chappelle joke you've ever heard. Another logical fallacy is red herrings. In books, a red herring is, an object that takes your attention away from something. And that's when I mention the whataboutisms, that's also a red herring. It's we're talking about this problem that I'm having, but what about this problem over here that somebody else is having? Red herring. There's the slippery slope argument, which is if we allow people to teach evolution in schools now, how long until they've abandoned God completely and nobody believes in anything except for we came from monkeys? That's a slippery slope argument. It's we allow this little thing, soon it's going to be huge. And that is another logical fallacy. We see that so often in news. It's hard to read through these and not be like, my God, our news is just this. Like
It's just too simple, right? It's just too.
I hate
simple.
news media so much.
Yeah.
There's circular arguments, which are CEOs are better leaders because they have superior leadership skills. It's an argument that backs itself up in like a circle, and you can't disprove it just because it's a closed loop. It's like, well, that there's no evidence for it, and the thing doesn't prove itself. Same thing with the Bible. It's the Bible is the one true book because it says so in the Bible. That is a circular argument. Ad populum is appealing to my emotions instead of presenting facts, basically, which we see a lot of that in the news. Straw man. A straw man argument is the welfare argument. It's the welfare queen. A straw man is presenting a bad image of somebody or something and pretending like that's everybody who is that thing. Like I said, we see that in another one is trans rights. We hold up somebody who is an absolute terrible human being, and we say all trans people are like that, or vice versa. It's looking at a conservative who has been caught doing amazing sex crimes and saying all conservatives are like that. Not everybody is, and the straw man argument is kind of garbage. And the last one I want to talk about is ad hominem, because that is the one that I see the most and the most egregiously used in modern media. And it's the one where we seem to have accepted it the most, even though it's one of the worst. An ad hominem is something factual happens, and because you don't want to accept it, you attack the person. One way we do this, and this happens on both sides, right and left, and I'll bring up examples. Somebody gets shot, like it was George Floyd got shot, and people immediately started digging into his past to find out, did he commit crimes? Can we justify why he got shot, even if it wasn't related to the case where he got his neck leaned on? But Philando Castile, all of the Black Lives Matter movement was based around every time somebody got shot in the street or killed by a cop, we struggled to find things in their past that would justify our political beliefs.
I remember that very strongly with the Rodney King thing.
Yeah.
They made a big deal of what kind of person he was. And it had nothing to do with that night or the circumstances.
Right.
He had it. It's the old, he had it coming. We're better off, We're
better off without this person. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the same thing happened when the January 6th rioter got shot this last week. It was during a traffic stop. He had his gun on him, but apparently, like what the information we have right now is he did not pull it, and that the information is murky. But the exact same thing happened. People started saying, "Well, he deserved it because he did a crime before," and it's like, no, you don't deserve it for your past crimes. You deserve it for whatever actions you took in that moment, if you deserve it at all. It's like, we don't, the cop that pulls you over isn't going to know cops aren't God. They're not going to pull you over and know your morals and whether you deserve to die or not. It's everyone should be treated with the same respect and dignity and be appointed justice.
See, that's what hurts me a little bit, because I am one of those weirdos that anytime those DNA people come back that they didn't commit the crime,
yeah,
I am not outraged. I kind of feel like, yeah, they didn't do this, but they were somehow involved.
Yeah,
they've done something similar. So it was still fair. They're going to jail. Maybe they didn't kill that guy, but they killed somebody. I swear that's how I feel every single time. And it's so stupid.
Oh, yeah. I also do the thing where I'm like, well, nobody's innocent. Like, there's no such thing as innocent. So, like, you probably deserve it somehow. But the same thing happens in modern debate. Like, in the middle of a debate, Todd, you'll be dunking on me. Like, I'll say something dumb. You'll come back with some facts and you'll be kicking my ass. And I will say, well, I don't have to listen to this because you're a religious nut job. Or you'll come back at me and be like, well, I don't have to listen to your bullshit because you are an OCD robot who like
right.
You're an emotionless asshole. So like an ad hominem is throwing away somebody's argument, right or correct or incorrect. You throw away their argument because there's something you dislike about their personality, and you attack that instead of listening to them. And boy, howdy, that is everything that politics is based on right now. So, and again, we needed to get through the logical fallacies because it used to be in early debate, like we were going back to like early 1900s, not all the way back to ancient Greek, but we're just saying that logical fallacies used to make people rethink their arguments. You call somebody out on an ad hominem and say, hey, you're attacking the person. You're not attacking their view, their politics, their economic plan. You're not attacking them on something worthwhile. You're attacking their morals, or that there's something disgusting about them. It used to make you look smart, or it used to shut somebody up when you said you're making a logical fallacy. Using that phrase, you are making a logical fallacy, it used to be a dunk. It used to make somebody stop and realize they're not absorbing facts and they're not even talking facts anymore. That now is a move. An ad hominem on YouTube gets you money. Like an ad hominem in the news media, if you are a news anchor and you use an ad hominem to say that a person is a piece of shit so you don't have to listen to their argument, that now wins. So we're going to pretend like it doesn't. Like in today's episode, we want to figure out how to win arguments even stronger than that. Like, we don't want to win by default. We don't want to win by using the weak thing that's popular right now. We want to win in earnest.
Well, one thing I think it's important to point out, and tell me how you feel about this, as manners have changed through the years, and listening to your elders, respect your elders. When was that? Was it in the 60s or the 70s when you're free to say your mind? I know it was a free country, but not really, right?
Yeah.
So people wouldn't stand up for themselves because they didn't think it was their place, right? They didn't have the authority. Like now, everyone has the authority with the internet, but it didn't used to be like that. You used to have to be educated or be famous or be somebody important, a pastor.
Right. I think we've got the reverse of what we had in the 40s and 50s. Like, you're talking about the good old days where you were free to speak your mind, but you're also free to get punched if you said something very dumb. So you could have arguments, but you also had to be polite, and you had to try to not make the other person mad enough to hurt you.
That is the best way to say that.
Yeah.
You take it outside, now, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God, you be invited to go outside and take it outside.
Pistols at dawn,
Yeah. And now we have the exact reverse. We have it to where most people are anonymous online. If they're not anonymous, if they post or make a video with their real name, real person, it still won't hurt them by and large. Like it's you'd have to really go out of your way to arrive at somebody's house and punch them or do something heinous. So for the most part, everybody's address and location is hidden, and everybody can say whatever they want, and it's a parasocial relationship. They don't have to suffer the consequences if they say something awful or offensive, which means that we are just saying the most awful things possible to attract the most attention to get money. I can't stress that enough. All of our studies from we did for the first 2 episodes of this, it all comes down to money. Why are people acting like this? Why does this type of argument prevail? Why are we following these people online? Insert reason why. It's always, money. Like, if you make these logical fallacies in an entertaining way to attack somebody and you post it on YouTube, you'll make your rent.
Then that's one of your argument things. And they say, well, he must be doing something right, or he wouldn't be so wealthy, right? Isn't that how we,
Yeah.
it's the P. Diddy thing. Oh, well, he's a billionaire. He's smart, It's like, well,
Right. And that's something we mistake too, is we think that people who argue successfully are intelligent, and that's not necessarily the case. They've just figured out how to phrase things in a gotcha way. They're not intelligent. They're dramatic. They're able to make an ad hominem sound like they just won. And I wanted to mention what winning looks like too, because in our last couple episodes we said winning an argument looks like you guys are ready to go out to Denny's and have pancakes together. If you win an argument, if you quote unquote win and like you actually convince somebody, it means that your views change a little bit, their views change a little bit. You kind of find a way to like fit their worldview into yours. You talk about it. And the fantasy that people have when they watch outrage media or they watch YouTube debates, the fantasy is that the other person will admit they're wrong, dramatically fall on their knees. They'll support your opinion. They'll realize and admit how foolish they were. They'll vote for the same politics that you do now. And it sounds like I'm being insulting, but we had an episode about grudges, and we found out that like that is actually literally the addictive portion of a grudge is the fantasy that somebody else will have this extreme revelation that they were wrong. And that is never the case. Nobody will ever admit they were wrong. Like they may admit that they were in the moment misinformed, or they may admit that they were following the wrong person or something. But almost never will they in the moment say they were wrong, because that hurts our personality. Like that would hurt our ego too much. And so what you'll get is you'll get small measures and half steps, and that's what you really got to ask for if you want to make serious inroads.
I like that analogy of going and eating something together, and both of you softening to those points, whether it's just empathizing more with how that person feels, understanding why they feel that way, but getting some movement, as opposed to the other one, which is you go home and you storm, you hate that person and you think, I should have said this, I should have said this, those.
Yeah. Having that fantasy is so dangerous. Like that's what is making admit and repent is a very powerful fantasy, and all news outlets rely on it as their incentive for rage bait media. And God, that's what we live in now, and that's because it makes so much money. Honestly, if we ever want to make money with this podcast, we could do it in 10 seconds. We would just go turn political, and I would start writing the phrases of the logical fallacies in. Doesn't matter what side we support, and it would be a cash cow. But that doesn't make progress in the world. It makes things as bad as they are now, basically. Speaking of rage bait media, I think we should probably talk about the early version of this argument, the religion in schools, and should we teach the Bible? Should we teach evolution? And where that started.
Well, now it's starting in the South. Now, kind of like you're talking about your Texas thing. Religion is, especially in the South, they're very, very afraid of the fact that religion being more afraid than the North of religion being taken out of school. And it's kind of that slippery slope thing. Once we kind of admit this one thing, then it's going to be gone. This is interesting. So this small town, how this all started was some of the local business people there thought this would be really good publicity. They thought controversial. It's going to be good for this struggling little town. So they interviewed the Scopes, or they talked to the Scopes. Now Scopes, this is the guy who was teaching in science, teaching about evolution. Now he was a part-time football coach. Okay. So he's not this, like, for some reason, when I first read this, I thought he was this dead set on, what do you say, Joe? Extreme,
Super, extremely science, like Bill Nye the Science Guy is trying to convince everybody.
Yeah. And so they asked him, and he's just fearless about it. And they said, have you taught this in school? And then I also thought some of the kids ran home from school and said, Ma, Pa, you won't believe what they told us at school. There's no Jesus,
Right.
And that wasn't the case at all. They had to kind of pull it out of him. And they said, can you teach biology without teaching evolution? And the Scope said, absolutely not. You have to tell that. That's just too big a thing, a building block.
Yeah. That makes sense to me.
But they wanted to bring all these people to this town. They thought this is going to boom the economy, and it did. But the stakes weren't. For some reason, I thought when he was doing this that they were going to be like, there's going to be like the guillotine for him, or he's going to be treated like a spy during the Cold War, locked up for 20 years. Like, how dare you,
Right.
But all he was facing was just a small fine. And he said, "Yeah, I'd be glad to go on," which is a pretty bold move back then, right? And in the South, it seemed like it would probably ruin his teaching career.
Yeah. I think it's funny that like everybody thinks that these major political moments happen when somebody is like a firebrand and they're ready to take on the system.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who's just like, it sounds fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't mind at all. And Bryan, I think it's important to remember that Bryan hadn't practiced law for 20 years. So he is a lawyer and he is the world's best public speaker. But he hasn't done this in 20 years. So it's needless to say there's a little ring rust. He was just deathly afraid that this was just, he saw this as the end of morals for humans. And he just couldn't handle this. He was losing sleep over this. He was sick. He was literally sick to himself on this. And for Darrow, this is like a basketball player getting to play against their sports hero, get to play against Michael Jordan. He was so excited to be having this debate with someone he admires so much, and that he's ready for. He's got the 100 cases and he's at his level. And there's probably not two other people that were at that level as far as fame and as far as, reps of believing what they believe in. Now, when it started, this turned into just a full-blown festival. Okay, they had monkeys dancing in the street. They were selling different things from the town. It was like a major festival. It looked like a street fair. The very first thing was to get the business part of it. It was a business deal, like you said, the finance. This was a financial decision for the town. So the people that set the whole thing up were business people, were local business people, and they just thought it would be a great way to promote the thing. But Jennings Darrow didn't know that. They thought this was a life or death argument. This was not fun for them. This was a big deal. So,
do you think this could have happened today? Like, if we had a debate like this, do you think it would kind of go down the same way?
No, I think it would be yelling and spitting and threatening. And no, what do you think?
I would like to believe it can. I think too many people have gotten used to rallies, riots, and boots in the streets. I think that it would be so awesome to have this. Like, this is such a dumb thing to say, but like, this would be great if we could have this in real life. Like if we could go back to two people want to debate something we feel hotly contentious about, and we have a fair about it. How cool would that be?
Where nobody died.
Yeah. While researching this, we're going to leave links to everything. Like, one of the best articles I found was The Guardian, and it was the science of influencing people and how to win arguments. I went and I took their information and I went and looked at like, who were they sourcing? What did they say? And it was like, I think this is more effective than the logical fallacies. I think bringing up a logical fallacy today wins you academic points. But I don't think it wins in the eyes of whoever's listening, especially if they're like, only the most educated people will ever look at you and be like, yep, good, you called him on his ad hominem. Like you scored a point. These can actually be ways to where you can demolish somebody's argument in verbal context. Like when you're in a conversation, when you're in an auditorium screaming at the head of the school, the what do you call it? The teachers union or whatever. This is how you win an argument. And we're going to start with how you disarm your own arguments first. Because if you start an argument but you're not ready, and you haven't like solved these issues first, you're basically going into it half loaded. Your gun is unloaded. You're naked. You don't have armor on, and oftentimes you'll get exploited for this. The easiest thing to do, if you watch like debaters on YouTube, the people who debate for a living, like on YouTube and stuff, they're not necessarily saying something very smart or intelligent. What they're doing is they're disarming the other person. They are calling into question the other person's argument. They are reacting. So here are things that they are reacting to. If you ever imagine yourself, what would I do against debating? It's like, Ben Shapiro or Jordan Klepner or one of these like celebrity debaters. How would I argue against them? And the way to do it is to prepare your information first. So step one is this is called the illusion of explanatory depth. Basically meaning you think you know more than you do, if we're going to put that in layman's terms. So an example of this is when asked about government policies and their consequences, most people think they can explain how a government policy works. Like if I ask you, Todd, to explain the current spate of tariffs that Trump is enacting, I think we all know what a tariff is mostly.
Right, but we don't know that. If we got granular about it, it'd be tough, right?
Yeah, my answer...
It's a tax on everything, right? That's what it is.
It's a tax on everything, yeah. He's imposing he said in the news 25% tax on everything that comes from these countries. But then you ask me, okay, well, what are they taxing? You say everything. Is it? What do we get from those countries? Is it goods? Yeah. Are we getting cars? Are we getting grain?
Make other things. What is that? How does that affect the overall thing? Or does it? Or does it just cost them money?
And if I tell you, well, it's everything. It is grain and cars, and then you would say, okay, well, who's using that stuff that comes over? Yeah. And I would probably argue something like, well, it's a consumer good, like it's on the shelves at the supermarkets, and it goes into parts. Like Apple uses like cobalt from Africa, and they put it into their phones, and then you ask me, okay, well, where, what does the cost do once it goes into that part? Like, if there's a 25% tax on the good coming over, is Apple going to pay them for that cobalt? Is that 25% going to go into that? So like the more granular you get, it's not nitpicking. Like that's the thing is people will often say that's nitpicking. Well, it's not nitpicking. If you ask them to walk through the steps of something that they think they know, it gets more vague and incoherent as it goes, and they get frustrated and angry. The problem is that we confuse like shallow familiarity with concept, like in-depth knowledge. So another easy way to do this is if somebody thinks they have depth in a subject, just focus on asking how questions rather than why questions.
How questions, okay.
Yeah. So if you run into somebody and they say, this is a terrible policy, or this person is really screwing up the country with this decision or this executive order or whatever. And it doesn't matter who it is. Like, I'm not picking on Trump because I'm using him as an example because he's president now. But if you go back to Biden and say, like, this executive order was bullshit, ask them why. And they'll answer. They'll say, because it goes against this thing. Like it's raising up prices. It's doing this thing. And then ask them, okay, why, how does that work? How does tariffs affect us that way? How does Biden's student relief program where does that money come from? Like walk them through the how, and very, very quickly almost everybody falls apart. Like 99% of people don't actually read any of this.
I can help with this.
Yeah.
Get in that state. If anyone's ever been around a 4 or 5-year-old where you're driving them in a car and they ask you literally about everything to the point where you want to limit their questions because they're genuinely interested. So if you ask it with that kind of, no agenda, just how
please. Yes. Todd.
Like you're soaking it up. You just want to know more about it. You don't know.
Yeah. Thank you so much for using that phrase. Yeah. Don't come into this like you're ready to destroy them in an argument.
No.
Just very innocently. I mean, like don't feign innocence. Just honestly be like, how does that work? Like walk me through it. I'm ready.
Right. Like you're
be like,
taking
be like,
notes. Like you're like, do you mind if I take notes on this? I want to
yeah,
learn about this. And then that's how you get them. Joe's saying how a little too much authority. You're saying it
yeah,
too
I
aggressively.
am like challenging.
There's too much testosterone in your how. Okay.
Well,
How?
the aggression comes afterward, because once they reveal to themselves out loud how little they understand about a subject, that's when you turn it around and say, oh, you haven't looked into this. And then you give your facts if you want to really wreck somebody's argument. One way we've seen this in action was during the Trump and Harris debate. They asked, what is your plan to reform medical care? And Trump's answer was, I have the concept of a plan, which was a terrible answer. There's a reason why both like both parties and both news organizations said that Trump lost that debate because of those kind of answers. And almost everything, if you go back and watch that debate, almost all of them are how questions, because that's so powerful. Like you can easily say, I have a moral about this, like this is immoral, this is terrible, this is morally bankrupt, how dare you? And then if you turn it into a function question, or a question of what are the facts, you turn into how questions. How does that work? Like walk me through it. Then somebody crumbles. Like you can watch them disintegrate, and their argument just puffs into smoke.
Is there strength in the other person doing more of the talking?
Yeah, it's letting them do that. It's letting them slowly wear themselves out and diffuse their own argument,
or hang themselves, right?
Yeah, exactly. They hang themselves. Yeah. Our next thing to prepare for if you're going to destroy somebody in debate: motivated reasoning. So the way they say it in The Guardian, I'm just going to quote it because I don't want to butcher their words. They say that politics can also scramble our critical thinking skills. Psychological studies show that people fail to notice the logical fallacies in an argument if the conclusion supports their viewpoint. This is known as motivated reasoning. Another way to put this is, we're going to link off to a TED educational talk where they talk about how after the war in Iraq and after Bush's war, they came back and they showed people evidence that there weren't any weapons of mass destruction. There were no dirty bombs. There wasn't any like nuclear arms or whatever. All the stuff that like the yellow cake uranium, all the claims that they made to get us into war, it didn't manifest. Like there wasn't any evidence. And what they found is that it actually strengthened people's beliefs in how the war was motivated or justified. It showing them evidence did the opposite. It made them feel stronger about their position, because you are showing them contrary evidence, but people don't think critically when they take moral sides. People don't. So motivated reasoning is, I can still find reasons for this to be true. If my favorite politician does a crime, or their family gets caught, or they get caught, I can say, oh, there's a reason they did that crime, or there's a reason why it's being blown out of proportion. So the facts don't matter as much. However, here's how to diffuse motivated reasoning. If you walk up to somebody, Todd, and you want to argue them in a point that you know they already hold the opposite view, if you want to convince, okay, here's a good one. Do vaccines cause autism? That's in the news right now, so we'll use that as an example. RFK believes that vaccines cause autism. The way to destroy moral reasoning, because no amount of evidence in the world will show people that vaccines are relatively safe. No amount of numbers in the world, no amount of there's no factual information that will convince them. And I don't care what anyone believes listening to this, by the way. I'm past the point in my life of trying to convince people of things. I want to help you. I want to talk about how to win arguments right now. I don't care what your beliefs are. The way to wreck up somebody's argument, if they are using motivated reasoning, they're saying, well, you can present all the facts to me that you want. I know this source is accurate. I know this person is justified and they say it. I know, this person over here in the news says it, and they are, they're the authority. So what you do is you start showing how gray a subject is, because everybody wants to rest their motivated reasoning, their beliefs, on black and white facts and topics. they want to say that, oh, I know this thing because it's God says it, or I know this thing because of it was brought up in this journal of science. So you start muddying that up. You say, okay, in real life, the argument about autism and vaccines that came from Andrew Wakefield's papers. Andrew Wakefield had this sort of like scientific fraud scandal going on, and he made profit from linking autism to vaccines in his scientific paper. He made a bunch of money. His stuff was retracted. He suffered horrible consequences in the scientific community, and he's the root source people go to when RF Kennedy is like autism comes from vaccines. He's quoting a news source that's quoting another paper that's quoting a journal that's going back to Andrew Wakefield's scientific paper, and that paper is bunk, and he made money from it, and it got destroyed. Muddy the waters. Okay, here's another thing. How many times in your lifetime have thoughts about climate change changed?
Oh, recently every year. I mean, it's like,
yeah.
So I've changed. Yeah, I didn't think it.
When I was in high school, I started for like a high school paper, like a final project. I covered basically like farmers' papers, or like farmers used to publish like these, not an almanac. It was more like a collective study. And the farmers back in like the 90s were like, hey, we're having to change the way we do our crops for these certain regions, and here's how it's going to continue to change, year by year. And it was a very sort of boring fact then. It was like everybody agreed it was a thing, especially the people who were like working the land. Like it was a very sort of like almost conservative value to be like, we're, farms are in trouble and nobody's paying attention. Like that was the conservative view. And then Al Gore used it almost as a political vehicle. Like he's like, climate change is real. Studies are showing this thing.
And then it became
also vote for me.
Then it became a liberal.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it flip-flopped and it became a liberal issue. And it was like,
isn't that funny? Isn't that funny?
And yeah. And then oil lobbies started, like more studies got done, and they're like, oh yeah, no, it's a carbon capture problem or a carbon emission problem. And then oil lobbies started paying people to report that it was they turned it more liberal than it was. They're like, okay, we'll put in, several $1 million a year to these politicians to continue this as a political battle. And now, like as of like the last 10 years, it started flip-flopping again. I have now sat in on construction board companies here in the Central Texas area where they're like, no, climate change is real. It's really messing up how we do construction. We can only operate during the earliest mornings. We can't pour certain types of concrete. We can no longer do certain types of farming. And it is now what it was in the 90s. It is now, okay, it's being used politically, but because it's such a political battle, we're being ignored. And farms need to operate and construction machines need to operate, and like we're losing ground and we're being ignored because it is such a political issue. So if you start a argument and like somebody says climate change is a hoax, even though that's last time we took the CDC or something like that, we found a national poll and it was like 80% or more of people believe climate change is real. However, they don't agree on how it happened. They don't always agree that it's a human problem, that we caused it. Doesn't matter. We're still having to cope with it. But as soon as you start taking a lens and going around an issue on the outside and saying who is profiting, like that's the biggest problem. The biggest way to win this argument is if it's motivated reasoning and you'll never be able to convince somebody on fact. Instead of trying to convince them on fact, just start pointing out who profits from disinformation or who profits from the information. You can win against good fact by saying, well, how much money did this person make by reporting it? How much money did this scientist make in his laboratories and all that? Like, if you know the numbers, you win. Like you can say, here's how much money they made for, the the endowment for the arts gave them this much money for finding this out or whatever.
Two of the big ones from my lifetime that are just, when you're talking about this, I can't help but think of. The one is weed. How people used to talk about weed and how it was just
that is such a good example.
Your life, and now it's doctors smoke weed and it's just so acceptable. I mean, it was so against a lot of people go away for life. The other one was HIV. I mean, I remember in high school when the basketball player was HIV positive, our science teacher, he lost it because Magic Johnson was on TV saying that he's going to be okay, that he's going to beat this. And I remember my science teacher being spitting, swearing mad in front of us. You're not going to be okay. You're going to die. And now you're teaching all these people, just morally outraged that he would say that.
Yeah.
and him being a man of science, he says, and that was in the 80s was the thing. Sex can kill you now. People are dying, So it got exaggerated a bit. Both those things. And the danger of both those things, weed and sex.
Well, and again, it goes back to motivated reasoning. You mentioned the marijuana thing. We now have an abundance of studies that show that marijuana helps people reduce their alcohol and opioid consumption. That if you get them on this safer drug, they will do less of the drugs that are known to kill immediately or destroy livers within a couple decades. So
but to your point, when did it become accepted is when money came into it.
Right.
When it was when all this
Nixon
revenue,
and Nixon's cabinet made a ton of money
when all this revenue came
villainizing it.
Yeah, when all this revenue came, now in selling it, now it's all of a sudden now it's not so bad.
Right, but we can play that the opposite too. If we want to say, well, weed is still dangerous, the way we destroy motivated reasoning in the opposite direction is we say, okay, so you're right. Nixon made weed illegal and made it stigmatized and put out, propaganda against it and made it seem like it's the devil's lettuce and it would kill you within one puff and it would addict you in one puff and all that stuff. Now we go the opposite. Now we can say, okay, well, these studies about how good it is for CBD for muscle relaxant and how great weed is for getting you off other hard drugs. Where are those studies coming from? A lot of that is coming from weed lobbies. Exactly. and people who own chains of dispensaries.
The car companies do this. They'll open up their own car magazines and then they'll make their cars the car of the year.
Yeah.
It wins every year, because it's owned by Ford,
Yeah. A very, so our next piece of, destroying somebody's argument, because we don't go into battle armed most of the time, is something called earned dogmatism. Now, earned dogmatism is kind of the opposite of the illusion of depth. Illusion of explanatory depth is, I don't know enough about the subject, I know the surface stuff, but I will pretend like I know more so that I can engage in this argument because I feel strongly about it, even though I haven't read about it. The opposite is earned dogmatism. It's, I went to school for this. I graduated for this. I work as a doctor. I work as a lawyer. I work as whatever it is, the people being affected by this. And because I am in this field, I overestimate my understanding of the subject. Because I am an economist. I'm not, by the way. But say if I was an economist and I said, oh, I will tell you how tariffs are about to wreck up America. That doesn't necessarily mean as an economist I've studied tariffs. That doesn't necessarily mean that as an economist I have looked into how the independent businesses will be affected by this. It's and we've all had this, by the way. The very dumb version of this is, well, my dad's a lawyer or my dad's a doctor, so I know this.
Which I've heard many times. Yeah. People will use that to make themselves credible, right? It's like my dad's a piano mover, so I'm good at playing the piano,
Yeah. Another good example of this is there was a study that came out, decades ago about how everybody trusts older doctors, especially if they're very old in their field, they're nearing retirement. They're the old country doctor who knows everybody and every family member, and they know everything about medicine, and they can just sort of thump on your chest and tell you everything that's wrong with you. Well, they found out that younger doctors are actually better diagnosticians because they've been through school more recently. They're still reading the medical journals that come out. They're up on the science. They look into all the new cool stuff that is happening in the field.
They don't know
and
they don't know everything yet.
Yeah. So this threw into doubt the idea that older doctors do know everything. They're like, oh, they need to get retrained like regularly. But that's because people, I'm going to quote the article here. They say people confuse their current level of understanding with their peak knowledge. So like they think about themselves when they were in their prime in whatever field they're in, and they're like, "That's me now." Like,
and they're paid at that rate, so they think that proves it, right? Because they're paid at what they've done, not what they've been doing.
I'm going to say something very controversial, and you can feel free to argue with me. I'll win because I've read these articles. I won't. I'm actually still pretty bad at arguing, but my thought on this is everyone who shows up in the news as a talking head who is giving a professional opinion, they're past their peak. Like whenever MSNBC or Fox News or any of these like very, let's say money motivated news channels, whenever they have somebody on who's like, we go now to Dr. X and Y for, like his expert advice on whether or not weed kills you immediately when you smoke it. And then somebody will you'll see the doctor and it's like, they're in their house. They're on like a bad Skype call or they're on a bad voice call, and they've got their degrees hanging on the wall behind them, but like the rest of the wall is bare. And it's like, no, that guy is past their prime. Almost everybody, if you have time to go on the news and talk, and you're not pushing a book, like if they get a psychologist or somebody who's like, or a professional who's like, they're selling a book right now and they're trying to promote it, they may be in their prime. But mostly if it's like a professional arguer or a professional talking head who shows up in the news multiple times, they're past their prime. They're cashing in. This is, and they absolutely suffer from earned dogmatism. They're like, I was the peak in my field back in my day, so I know these things. And it's like, no, you don't. Like there's a good chance that you have a surface understanding like the rest of us.
And I think that's cool. A good point that like, let's take a journalist, because you're talking about talking heads. Probably when they were in college and they were learning their trade and really cared about what they were talking about, that's when they were probably the most dangerous, when it wasn't just a job.
Yeah. If you want to spot this and you want to annihilate it, like if you're listening to somebody talk about their knowledge and how great they are and that they should be winning this argument based on, well, I'm in this field, so you should listen to me. Look for phrases like, we all know. That's something politicians use a lot, especially this president and the last president we just had. It's, we all know this thing. And that's telling you that they have earned dogmatism, and they use the phrase, we all know, or we all understand, to supplement something they don't want to explain because they probably can't. When they tell you should look into the issue, that means that they don't know it. And you should probably start asking them how questions, because it's going to dissolve them like a bag of sugar in the rain. So if somebody says, why don't you look into this? Or if you look at the numbers, you'll see. And then you ask them, what's the numbers? How would you look into it? If somebody claims something is common knowledge, or if somebody says, I do this for a living, I would know. Ask them then. Ask them to verbally show you the receipts. Just be like, okay, if it is common knowledge, let's walk through it.
Well, now, how do you set this up? So to set this up as a win-win, so you're asking these questions with your aggressive testosterone, how, right?
I was going to say, this isn't a win-win. We're trying to learn how to dominate people here. Come on.
I would say, when do you start to see that they're going to cave in, and then you got to kind of make it right. You got to make them feel not so bad, so you could. Or are we not there yet?
Oh no! There we can get there. We'll get to how to close an argument soon.
I just see you spitting and kicking this person in the street right now.
Yeah,
they've had enough, Joe. Is what I'm trying to say.
When they start collapsing, let's cap this off. When somebody realizes that they have stepped into your trap, when they are trying to use motivated reasoning, when they're trying to use illusionary depth, or if they're trying to use earned dogmatism, if they think they know something and your how questions make them stutter, like they get into, they don't know how tariffs work. They don't know how, studies on marijuana work. They don't know who made all the money in the world from making climate change a political issue. That's when you say, oh, you don't know, you haven't looked into this area. Like you call it out. You verbally call it out. You will see this very often on YouTube when debaters win an argument, quote unquote win. By the way, this is ironically basically how we're gonna play clips of the movie that came out from Clarence Darrow versus William Jennings Bryan. But asking how questions is exactly how Darrow went about this trial. Did you end up watching the movie Inherit the Wind?
No, I did not. I just read about it.
It's black and white. It's very much it's very dramatized in a way that it was like in that era of film, everything is very, very dramatic and shouty. And they change the names of everybody. They don't call him Scopes, the science teacher. They don't call Darrow by Darrow, and they don't use any real names. But the actors look very, very, very much like the people they're trying to portray, which is weird to me that they would be like the William Jennings Bryan character is spot on.
Isn't that weird? They did. Whoever did the casting director did a great job, but everybody else was terrible.
But I'm gonna intersperse clips from that into this episode here and there, just so people can hear the dramatization of the how questions that were used to destroy and disarm arguments about evolution versus teaching religion. So can we get back to the trial a bit, and enough of my quote unquote dunking on people nonsense?
But how? Okay. So this is interesting. So the judge is a extreme Christian by anybody's. So he's biased. And how biased is he? I didn't know they used to do this. You know, they used to pray before a trial started. It shouldn't surprise me.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they used to have a prayer. I forget, and that was pretty normal in court before things. So let's have God bless this, that it's fair and all this. Well, what's funny about it is, so Judge Ralston was the judge. That Sunday, he went to church at his church, and guess who gave the sermon? William Bryan Jennings.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, and he sat in the front row. The judge of the court sat in the front row as William Jennings spoke at his church. Now, what's interesting is Darrow, like all really good attorneys are what are the experts at? They're really good at picking the right jurors, right?
Right.
Picking jurors who are going to be biased, picking jurors who they think will lean their way. But Darrow said he didn't care. He wanted 12 anyone's because he was this confident in this. I thought that was interesting.
I suspect it was confidence because Darrow thought that he could win, but I don't think he planned to win. This is by the way, my personal suspicion is that he never really planned to win. He just knew that it was going to be on radio. Like he realized that the trial would be broadcast, and I think the jurors didn't matter because of that. The
publicity of it, right? It's a win-win.
Yeah,
he's just doing there, and he's made a good living out of just fighting. He doesn't have to win all of his fights. It became clear right away that the judge was not going to hear any science nonsense. He didn't let Darrow call any of his witnesses. He didn't want to hear. He didn't want to hear the rhetoric. He didn't want to have this have a promo for evolution. He didn't want to hear any of this bullshit rhetoric.
Now, if this had gone the other way, it would have just been like, if the judge hadn't been so biased, if the judge had wanted to hear about evolution, it probably wouldn't have made news because it would have been like a boring trial where one scientist after another explains evolution to the jury like it's high school. It
becomes a class.
It wouldn't have been movie worthy. It wouldn't have been turned into this old black and white movie. I don't think.
Probably shorten it up too. You don't want movies to be 7 hours long, right? You want it to be an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Keep people's attention.
Do you think that was smart of the judge to be like, no, we're not going to hear any of this shit?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it. I think that this was kind of like playing court too, you know. And then he knew it too. Again, the what was at stake was a small fine, but the
Yeah.
real thing was at stake was a lot bigger. But do you think they knew that at the time?
I think so. Because the way everybody reacted, like the town had the right idea, which is like, let's have a fun trial that everybody cares about, and we'll make a parade and fair about it. But I think that these two lawyers knew how big this was, because they both were used to, they both understood the public eye. They both understood what it means to win in public. Because Darrow was a very successful defense attorney of people who were like downtrodden. Like he defended people who were mentally ill from wrongfully getting the death penalty. He defended people who were who had been on trial for like going against powerful corporations like union busters, and like so he was used to, the victory isn't about getting somebody off. The victory is about changing the public opinion. That was his career. And then Jennings Bryant, on the other hand, his entire career at this point in his life was convincing people. Like he didn't care about law as much anymore. Like it wasn't about whether or not you won in court. It was more about whether he could go on tour and continue getting, was it several $1,000s per public speech?
He get $6,000.
Yeah.
So he was getting $6,000 in those days to do a speech. He was one of the best public speakers. And it's important to remember that to him, this was very important. This was, I mean, he was literally putting his life into this, his health, his life. You know, he was saving souls. He thought that this was what God had sent him to do. God had wanted him to be a politician, and he had done amazing things in that field. But now he totally done a 180 turn and was focused totally as a spiritual person.
Yeah. And to remind people, or if anybody hadn't heard the episodes before this, William Jennings Bryant, he had a conversion when he was young, when he was in his teens, and it totally it turned him into a Baptist, and it changed his life. Like he said it was the most powerful thing that had ever happened to him, and it led him to having an amazing career and an amazing life. And he wanted that for everybody. Like if you're like, why is this person going to what looks like a exhibition match, like a trial that is almost has no stakes? Why is he putting this much effort into it, especially when it's like so politicized, so public, and why so many people are interested? And it's like, well, this is his calling. Like he genuinely thinks that if he gets people to admit that only the Bible should be taught in school, it'll give every teenager this experience. Like it will give everybody the same empowerment and like belief that it gave him. And that's worth fighting for. That's huge. When you were sort of like kind of cracking into this, was it amusing to you that like did the subject amuse you, or were you more like, this is near and dear?
I was indifferent about that part of it. I was just very interested in the characters, because they were just such a, just a who's who of, it would be like Johnny Cochran, and it's bigger than the OJ trial. And it's just, to me, it was interesting. It's just good, interesting history. What about you?
I think I thought it was funny at first. Like I think the very first time I heard about this, I think it was in a Drunk History episode, which was very funny. But then after first hearing about it, and then reading about these two people, and like getting into the history of the Scopes Monkey trial, I started realizing that this is both the safer way for us to have discord, to have an argument about something, and also probably the way we should continue it. Like for me, when I first read about it, I'm like, it's high stakes. It's like, this would determine the outcome of like what we teach in schools, and how we believe things, and what young people are exposed to, and all this stuff. It has as many stakes as you can imagine, which made it so dramatic for me. But then at the same time, I realized like it's dramatic, and I was hoping one way or the other. I was actually hoping that the science would win, Because I think everyone should be allowed religion, but I do rely a lot on science when I like study things, like almost entirely. So I was like, man, what if we backslide into those days? And then I realized it would be worth it because we had public discord again. Right now, what we have is people trying to sign executive orders and will things into existence because one person wants it or a minority of people want it. What I would love to have is this again. I would love to have a system where we have trials that are financially have low stakes. Nobody's going to get killed over this, but it's going to be a huge public spectacle. Everyone will hear about it. Everyone will listen, and it will change minds. And then we'll all come back together as humans. Like the breadth of humanity and a nation will come back together and decide this every 100 years or 50 or whatever. I would love that. I would love to have the pendulum swing and the marketplace of ideas come back again.
Well, I think too how these two, the leading characters in this, William Jennings Bryan and Darrow, how much respect they had for one another. And I think, even though they felt so passionate about that one way, they still could be nice and civil.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the salty tears, and it wasn't the slam dunk on them.
Right.
I don't think we have that kind of maturity anymore.
Their prestige was on the line. They were going to make money after this. Like that, it was partly setting up their career, but morally they were fully all in. Like this, like we said before, this defined Jennings' life, and at the same time, Darrow had built his entire like career and life around the morality of an issue, and morals and things. So like you knew these two people cared so deeply for this issue that they would put everything into their argument and everything into the trial. What we have today with YouTube and professional debaters, they personally barely give a shit about the issues they're arguing. They just want to win. Like when I hear people debating on YouTube, or if I see somebody debating in the news, it's like, I think to myself, I'm like, how can you care this deeply about 12 different issues? Like you clearly have a surface level understanding of the politics, and you're just getting money because you're good at structuring your argument, but you can't care about all this stuff like this. Like this doesn't mean much to you the way you're arguing it. It's just another brick in the wall of your career as a sophist.
Well, it takes us to the case, right? I didn't think of this until now, but Darrow did really, really outfox William Jennings Bryan. He got the best of him. So he puts him up on stand. He swears him in as his only, his only what?
His only witness.
His only witness.
Totally unheard of. Like who in their right goddamn mind would look over at the other lawyer and say, well, I'm just going to have you will be my witness.
Who's the most prepared person in the room by far.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He has spent literal years writing a speech. Like the best speech writer in the world right now has been spending years writing a speech about how the Bible should be taught in school. That's the last person you would ever want to like have up on stand. And then he gets him on the stand. And what is the question that trips him up? Like how does he ask it?
He said, the world being created in 6 days without the sun, how do we know what a day is? We have no way of knowing what a day is.
So Todd, if you and I were in Bible studies together, by the way, I did terrible in Bible studies. I tried. I've come from a Catholic family, so I didn't understand this when I was young. That like in the creation myth, it took God 6 days. I didn't think about it, but I was like, well, God must have a watch, like a pocket watch. Like he must know how long a day is. Like it's 24 hours, right? Like he intended it to be a day at some point. So like he must have had this mentally. He must have been like, well, a day is going to be, 24 hours. So I'm just going to, but okay. So the opposite argument that Darrow's making is what it's, well, without a sun,
we don't know what 24 hours is. Yeah. We don't know what a day is. A day hasn't been made yet. So there's no days. You have to have a sun set and rise to have a day. Okay.
Why does this trip up William Jennings Bryan? Is William Jennings Bryan like...
Seems almost too simple, right? You think he'd be able to have some kind of quick-witted... Well, I think he doesn't think it's as relevant, right? Whether it took him, you know.
So he's being funny. Jennings Bryan, like we've talked about in last episodes that he's kind of like a joker, and he makes fun of his political enemies sometimes, like when he's like during questioning and stuff. So like he's probably like, this is a childish question.
Yeah, it's beneath me, and he's saying, well, it might take millions of years, perhaps.
Okay, so that's the slip up, is when Jennings Bryan admits,
like, he might not even believe that, like 6 days is impossible, right?
Yeah,
like it's not realistic. It's like it's just stuff we tell kids, kind of thing, you know. But it probably took longer, you know.
So almost as a total slip, Jennings Bryan is like, I don't know, God sets his own clock. It's 24 hours. It's a week. It could be millions of years. Who gives a shit? It's God. He does what he wants. And
that's not the point.
And
right? It's not the point.
Yeah. Right? But that's where Darrow made an absolute freaking fool of him, from my understanding, is because he did you get to the part where he says like, why that is such a bungle, like why Jennings Bryan. So what he found out is that Jennings Bryan hadn't read about evolution. So like Jennings Bryan came in just knowing a hell of a lot about the Bible, studied it his whole life, was willing to champion it, ready to destroy the enemy, he's ready to destroy Darrow, but he didn't crack a science book.
So he was he was ill prepared then.
Yeah, he did not realize that evolution claims it took millions of years. He just thought science teaches we come from monkeys, and what stupid shit is that? So
he credited it with with it.
When he flippantly answers, sure, God's creation period could have taken millions of years. Who gives a shit? It's God. His days are as long as he says, and whatever he wants. That's when Darrow was like, aha, you are saying it could have taken millions of years. And then
that's Darrow, evolution. Yeah,
that's evolution.
Evolution 101.
And that's when Jennings Bryan is like, excuse me, because he didn't read it. He did, and that's the argument we're making when we talk about how to win a debate. You go through the how of something, not the why. That's exactly what Darrow did. Is he's like, how does this work? How does this work? How about the days? Like, how do you have a day if you have no sun? And at some point he realizes Jennings Bryan, for as amazing of a speaker as he was, he didn't read. Like he didn't get into the science.
He didn't prepare. Overconfident, and he thought God was on his side. I guarantee it. I guarantee it.
So you said that the public and the people listening to the radio thought that he had won, that Darrow, they were like...
A landslide, yeah. The only person that wasn't impressed was the judge.
Judge is like rolling his eyes. He's like, this is so dumb.
Court is adjourned until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
The judge did what he was going to do. Like, do you remember, did you already say how much the fine was? I didn't read that part.
But it was minimal. It was a speeding ticket back in the day.
It was a speeding ticket. So everybody in the public is like, Darrow and evolution won, obviously.
Right.
And then the judge is like, no, by law, like by technicality, Darrow lost and Scopes lost. And instead of hauling him off to prison, they're just like, here's your fine.
But the big thing is Darrow. So Darrow gets this huge point with him admitting that it could have taken millions of years. Okay. But remember, William Jennings Bryan is the best public speaker of all time. And he can convince anyone of anything, and he's done it time and time. But Darrow refuses, so he gets to give his closing statement like all attorneys do. But Darrow refuses to make a closing argument. So he says the state rests. If he would have given just even a short closing argument, and William Jennings Bryan had this speech prepared, the biggest, most important speech of his life, a speech that would change everyone's mind forever, didn't change how he wasn't able to give it. So if he would have got that press time on the radio and say this speech that it was the best speech he'd ever given, so he got cheated out of that because he was banking. He didn't care about saying that because he was going to make it all up when he went last.
I was going to say Clarence Darrow must have known that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like William Jennings in our past episodes, in our last two, we talked about how he went to a Nebraska, which was a red state that had never voted Democrat ever, and he gave his famous Cross of Gold speech, and he flipped he won a congressional seat. He flipped the county, like he did the impossible with a speech. And now he's about to do his magnum opus. He is he's an old man. He's nearing the end of his life, and he's like, I'm going to give the best speech ever. I'm going to convince the whole world that we should be teaching evolution in schools, and that giving this religious experience to teenagers is the only way to live. And like Clarence Darrow's like, nah, we're good.
Exactly. And so what he did was he went and he typed out his speech, William Bryant, to put it out in publication, but it had lost some of its audience by then. It wasn't the same as him talking live.
I didn't know that. We need to read that.
He had given his life to this cause. And then 4 days later, people say he died of a broken heart. He was still in Dayton, Tennessee.
Oh, wow. Do you think he died of a broken heart?
Well, it's probably diabetes. But
okay.
A combination of energy spent, right? I mean, for an older guy who was sick to put that much energy into something, can you imagine?
That, it's the, I mean, like, part of me is like, is it because his will gave out and he was just so sad? Or do you think he just went on a bender? Like he's like, screw this, and then just like ate a whole cream cheesecake himself and drank a pint of vodka. Like, I'm assuming there's no evidence for any of that. I'm making stuff up, but like, I wonder how much of it was just like depression afterward.
I
being
think
denied
so, right?
his best speech ever.
Yeah, to be let down, and that was it. I felt like he failed.
Yeah. To kind of I don't want to end this episode on just the thought of like, you can dunk on people for money, you can destroy people's arguments to win, but ultimately you're not going to convince them. You're just going to get applause from the people who already agree with you. Like you're going to get paid and you're going to get claps from people who already feel the same way. Can we kind of circle back to end this episode and talk about how do you convince people against their will, or how do you convince people against what they believe already? Can we sort of like talk a little bit about that?
Please.
Okay. There's an old rhyme. I don't know if you've heard it. A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. That sounds very much like a Benjamin Franklinism. Like for instance, we say that America is the greatest country on earth. But a good response is, by what metric? There's a clip from the newsroom where Jeff Daniels has this spoken to him by a college student that America is the greatest country, and he's like, well, Finland is number 1 in happiness, and we're number 19, and we're like number 40 something in education, we're way down in medical coverage. Like, he just goes through them statistically, and even though he has all these facts, only the people who agree with him are clapping. Have you ever in your life swayed somebody away from an opinion that they held strongly?
I don't think so. Unless it's to date me. And they didn't want to at first. So I guess so, right? Yeah, I think so. But I think it takes time. Do you have to win it right now? Can you plant those seeds? Does that count as winning if you don't win it in the moment?
That's okay. So that is actually what I'm kind of arguing for is it may actually be better to not be right. And it may be better not to be convincing. Like it may be better not to win, which is a really, like, that makes me sound weak and passive aggressive.
No, I don't think so.
But planting seeds might be much better.
Yeah, a timer. You've got a timer on this, and that you set it, and you got them to listen to enough, right?
Exactly. You hit that on the head. It's, if you can get someone to listen to you because you already agree on several subjects, and then you plant the seed on something that they strongly have an opinion about, it doesn't attack their personality. It doesn't attack them as a person. Because, like, when we say personality, I mean, like, People do that with politics. People do that with politics all the time. Somebody will say, I am a Trump person. And they don't mean Trump fan, Trump voter. What they mean is a Trump person. And the same thing with the other side. It's people will say, well, like there were people being interviewed when Biden was very obviously suffering cognitive decline. And senators were saying things like, we're riding with Biden. And that's like all they would say. Like they just repeated that phrase over and over again. There's clips of that online. Attacking somebody's personality and trying to yank part of their personality out with facts won't work ever. What is better is to take something they have as a strong opinion that isn't part of their personality. And if you are already on good terms with them and you're friends with them and you've acknowledged that you're both reasonable people who can have a good conversation, that's when you introduce the idea that, hey, climate change is kind of a settled fact, but we're still working on how it's happening. And then ask them how they feel it's happening. Like start asking questions, get into what they know and what they feel.
I think that,
not in a way.
Yeah. And when you do your how thing, I think that's the way of really listening to what they think too, and kind of getting their guard down. Not only are you getting information or you're kind of getting them to stall out. And then once you've worn them down with that, after they've exhausted they've gone on all the rabbit holes that they know because they're not well. And it says something for being prepared too. And the separations and the preparation, as some famous athletes say.
And the way that looks in the end, if you don't want to use that how questioning to destroy them at the end and say, haha, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. Instead, you say, okay, so you've gotten this far. You know these many steps into the process. You know how some of this works. I know how some of this works. Let's figure out the rest. Like what if, we're both kind of right, and that our conclusions aren't that far apart, but that we're both missing the major, like what can fix it. If let's say Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan had ended that courtroom scene with, okay, maybe God did take a couple million years for the first quote unquote biblical day, like during creation. Maybe that means God does exist. And maybe that also means that God tooled around with a lot of other stuff beforehand. Maybe evolution is just, he took a lot of different animals and made a lot of different clay models and decided that, one of them would eventually be human. Like, we don't know. So like there are ways to twist arguments or ways to use a how deconstruction to meet in the middle, or at least plant seeds so that the other person will think about it after. And that's honestly maybe the most effective way to argue and to dominate somebody in an argument, is just to make them think about their hows. Like you walk them through their chain, find that there's broken links, and then when they start trying to fill it in on their own, slowly, logically, and with good reasoning, that's when they start putting in factual things to replace those links. What happens if you burn bridges and piss them off and you walk away, clapping your hands because you did such a good job demolishing them? They don't fix those links with facts. They go to Facebook and they fix it with misinformation and bullshit.
And they just don't like you.
Yeah.
They just hunker down in their entrenched beliefs.
Yeah. I still side with Benjamin Franklin that it's better to be liked than to be right.
Loved.
But I'm starting, it's better to be loved than right. But I'm starting to think that the way to win an argument is to not argue at all. It's to just be very impassioned about something, and to
be inquisitive, like a 4-year-old.
Yes.
Let them stall out. Say your points.
And be excited.
Say your points with love. Yeah. Say your points with love, and don't expect them to change right away.
Right. That's very well said.
You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.reengineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, feedback, and articles for each of our episodes.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.